This is CNN Breaking News.
There's breaking news just coming into the Situation Room right now. The Georgia election interference case against President Trump and others in their effort to overturn the 2020 presidential election results will continue, but with a new prosecutor. This comes after Fulton County Attorney Fani Willis was previously removed from the case. Let's go live right now to CNN crime and justice correspondent Caitlin Polantz. She's got all the breaking details. Caitlin.
Wolf, a criminal case against President Donald Trump is alive again with a new prosecutor. This is the case in the state of Georgia in Fulton County around the 2020 election, Donald Trump's efforts there, and an alleged conspiracy that he led or is alleged to have led with top officials, including Rudy Giuliani, advisors on his campaign, as well as many people in that state who acted as fake electors. This is a case that had been charged 2 years ago and had been essentially on ice, in limbo. It was not moving forward because the prosecutor, Fani Willis, she had been removed from it earlier by a state court. However, there was a deadline given by a judge to find another prosecutor, and indeed one has shown up. It is the person that was charged with trying to figure out who was going to prosecute this case. I want to read a little about that prosecutor now, what he is thinking. His name is Peter Skandalakis. He says, the decision to assume responsibility for this matter was reached only after careful and deliberate consideration. While it would have been simple to allow the prior judge's deadline to lapse or to inform the court that no conflict prosecutor could be secured, thereby allowing the case to be dismissed for want of prosecution, I did not believe that to be the right course of action. The public has a legitimate interest in the outcome of this case. Accordingly, it is important that someone make an informed and transparent determination about how best to proceed. I made the decision to assign the case to myself. So Peter Skandalakis saying he's going to decide what to do with this indictment of Donald Trump and others in the state of Georgia, whether to push it forward. He says already he's looked at many of the documents in this case, witness statements, bankers' boxes worth of evidence that had already been collected by prosecutors, and he is going to determine what else to do here and what proceedings might be going forward. However, Wolf, Donald Trump's attorney in this case, the defense counsel Steven Sadow, he says this politically charged prosecution has to come to an end. We remain confident that a fair and impartial review will lead to a dismissal of the case against President Trump. Wolf?
All right, Caitlin Polantz with the breaking news. Thank you very, very much.
All right, joining us now is CNN legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Elliot Williams. How significant is this?
It is significant in that, we've just put our hats back on to a couple of years ago. Remember, there were a series of prosecutions against then former president, now current President Trump, both at the state and federal level. One of them was in Georgia, and as Caitlin had talked about, the prosecutor, Fani Willis, had been removed from the case. Well, the judge had said the case, or the appeals court had said the case can be revived if a new prosecutor comes on. That case is now revived, and so once again, we are in the world of some percolating prosecution being brought against President Trump.
And Elliot, remind our viewers why Fani Willis is no longer prosecuting this case.
Right, she was prosecuting the case because of a relationship she had with a lead investigator or prosecutor on the case. Now, the trial judge who'd looked at the matter had said that while the relationship itself was not improper, there was at least an appearance of let's call it impartiality or impropriety that at least cast enough doubt on the case. It could still proceed, but look, there's a cloud over it. The appeals court then looked at it and said no, just to restore and maintain faith in the system, she should not prosecute this case. But again, it can proceed if someone else takes the case on, and that's where we are today.
But the bottom line is, just to take a step back, you have the President of the United States as a criminal defendant
yes.
in this case.
Yes.
I mean,
now, and there's the really important thing here, which is that this is an investigation or prosecution at the state level. All the stuff that people have heard about pardons for people connected with January 6th or Supreme Court rulings with respect to the president may not apply at the state level. I say may. That is a very important word because anytime you are talking about the investigation or prosecution of the president of the United States, it's an uncharted world, and we just don't know quite what will happen. But again, state prosecutions aren't touched by federal pardons, and that's sort of what we're seeing here.
Do we know anything about this new prosecutor taking over for Willis?
I do not, and this is all breaking very quickly, and I haven't looked a ton into his background other than the fact he's a Georgia prosecutor.
That's all we know. Yeah.
How do you expect the Trump administration, to proceed now?
Yeah, I would think they would still revive the arguments that came up over the course of the last several years, which is that he is the president of the United States. Presidents, as the Supreme Court has said, are immune from prosecution for a host of conduct related to their work in office, even when sometimes that conduct is personal. They will, I would think, make the argument that, look, this is once again reviving another investigation into the president of the United States and his conduct before that should not proceed. Also, the fact that he's a sitting president now being prosecuted, they would say, look, maybe you could make an argument for prosecuting him in 2029, but there's no reason why a president should be sitting for interviews and depositions and providing evidence while he's trying to run the country. That's their argument. I'm not weighing in on it. That's just what I think they'll say.
So on that point, realistically, will the Trump administration, or the president himself for that matter, view any prosecutor as fair and impartial in this case?
I don't think so, not in this case when he is being prosecuted. And again, a lot of this comes out of the Constitution. The president is the one role in the United States that only one person can hold at a time. It's not like even the Supreme Court, where if you take somebody out, there's still 8 of them that can still do it. The argument will be that no president can ever sit for investigation or prosecution because he has a unique job. That you're going to hear that again probably very soon when they move to either dismiss or take some action with respect to this case.
And Julie, I want your reaction to this latest news. New prosecutor appointed to this case, Peter Skandalakis.
Well, Maura touched on it, and I think this is actually the most salient part of this whole discussion, which is that we are now living in a country where prosecutors and law enforcement officials are afraid to actually prosecute cases because they're worried about the President of the United States using his office and his power to go after them. That is a banana republic. That is not a democracy. It's certainly not the world's oldest and greatest democracy. And so I would just go on to say that the saddest part of everything that we just heard now is that Peter Skandalakis felt the need to take this case on himself because nobody else would do it, despite the fact that these people are sworn law enforcement officers who have sworn to pursue justice irrespective of who it might compromise. And so I think from that perspective, this is something for us to all think about. We now not only have a Justice Department at the federal level that is using its power to go after the president's enemies and to shield his friends, but we also now have prosecutors at the state level who are so terrified of the president that despite the terabytes that they apparently have in evidence, despite the fact that we have recordings of the president demanding that the Secretary of State find votes for him that did not exist, that despite all of that evidence that any one of us would have been indicted on long ago, this president has been able to scare people out of prosecuting him and his allies.